Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, and today we have one of our, I'd say, VIPs. I say that a lot, but it's because we invite a lot of our VIP patients, who's also a researcher coming on with us, PhD candidate, Faith Heeron, and maybe in the future we can have her on and say Dr. Faith Heeron. So welcome, Faith.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about your background. First, we'll start with academic background because I always think that's very interesting.
Sure. So my backgrounds are kind of linked, but I'll just keep the academic side of things first. I had bariatric surgery when I was 16, and I remember going through that process and just thinking that I had been told for so long that it was so simple, but if I was struggling so hard, my family was struggling so hard, and there were other families struggling so much that they needed to have a specialty dedicated clinic to this issue, that it might be more complicated than people were telling me. So that was kind of my first instinct that I wanted to go into research. I grew up in a rural town in North Carolina, so I didn't have a lot of access to like academic medical centers and things like that.
We're in North Carolina.
I'm from Sanford, which is
Okay.
a little bit outside of Fayetteville.
Got it.
And we could, UNC and Duke were not far drives, but wasn't something that I was seeing every day research-wise.
Yeah.
But something in the back of my head was like, you want to go into research. So I decided to go into UNC Chapel Hill. I know you are a fellow Tar Heel.
Tar Heel.
Yes, I loved my 4 years there, and I got to work in eating disorder research while I was there, and I got to work with Duke on some obesity-related research projects.
Very cool.
And so I saw a bunch of people with PhDs after their names and figured that I needed one of those to do what I wanted to do, and met Dr. Cardell on Twitter, actually, and saw she was looking for a PhD student, so applied, and now I'm at UF working on my dissertation.
That is very cool. Awesome. So you had bariatric surgery at age 16. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And so was this struggle like lifelong? When was the first time you remember struggling?
My mom knew my weight was going to be something that I struggled with from very early on. I have never known a time where I was a normal weight. I was always trending in the 99th percentile for both my height and weight. You can kind of look at pictures when I was a kid and I'll think I'm 7 or 8. My mom's like, no, you were actually a lot younger in those pictures, but I always just looked a lot older and always struggled with my weight for as long as I can remember.
And you remember like, I don't know, just being hungrier, or is it just like normal, like, and you just felt heavier? Or?
Well, it's interesting because my brother didn't struggle in the same way that I did. So it's interesting that we were in the same household, we're in the same environment, and yet we're both struggling in very different ways. But I don't remember kind of excessive hunger. And I think that's because to me, that was my normal. And I've talked about this in my journey with Manjaro, is that I didn't realize what it meant to feel full and satiated. So you asked now, did I feel hungry then? And I didn't think that it was excessive hunger then until now that I'm older and it's more managed looking back now.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So 16, you had the surgery, and what was your experience going through the surgery?
I had a wonderful care team at Duke. I still get to work with them to this day in a professional capacity, so that's really nice. But it was the first time I felt like someone was listening to me and understood. And I am really appreciative of my surgery, and that is because it was something that to me highlighted the fact that I had a medical condition. So I had spent so long feeling like it was my fault, and that if I had just wanted it more badly, or if I had tried hard enough, that I could do it. And so this surgery for me was the realization that this was bigger than me, and that this was beyond me, and that I actually needed a medical or a clinical intervention in order to manage my condition.
And how was it? So like, how much weight did you lose with it and all that, if you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, that's always a hard question, because it's like I had the surgery and then a year later you're at your lowest weight, but then ever since then it's just been like this.
Okay.
So I don't think I ever got into a normal BMI category or anything like that, but I was at a place where I felt comfortable both mentally and physically. I was playing tennis in my high school's tennis team, and that was something that I hadn't gotten to do before.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah.
Very cool. All right. And then that kind of, I mean, that obviously got you into the thinking about weight as research. And then, do you mind talking about how old you are now? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I am 25, so I think
Okay.
we're close to the 10-year mark
Getting
of
close
the
to
bariatric
10,
surgery.
10 years. Okay. And tell us what your research is then, because then obviously you got into the research.
Yeah, so my dissertation is actually on identifying preoperative educational needs for adolescents who are undergoing bariatric surgery. And so I'll be interviewing a couple different stakeholder groups just to identify what's missing from current materials. There isn't actually a lot of published content on what kind of educational materials adolescents are receiving prior to surgery, but there's some qualitative evidence that there are some topics they wish they knew more about before having surgery. So my plan is to systematically identify those and then build some evidence-based materials that incorporate their perspectives.
That's cool. What about your perspective? What did you feel like you could have or should have known before?
I wish that I had more of a comprehensive understanding of what obesity was. Understanding obesity as a chronic condition isn't something that I've really sat with until actually the past 6 months. And being on a medication for my weight management, I've realized that this isn't going to go away. This is forever. And of course, I knew that on an intellectual level, studying it every single day. But the reality of that as a patient wasn't something that I really came to understand until very recently. So
Do you think you could have grasped that as a teenager? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure, but
I
thinking about myself, I'm like, I don't know.
I think it's harder because any other chronic condition is super hard for a teenager to
Yeah.
comprehend, right? Like having to carry around an inhaler for asthma is a big responsibility, or having to manage diabetes as an adolescent is a big responsibility. But I think it is a little bit harder because there's so many mixed messages coming from outside of a medical community, right? That you're constantly getting from media or from people on social media, who are telling you conflicting messages. So I feel like it is a little bit harder of one to process, but I still feel like it's our responsibility as researchers and clinicians to kind of start getting them in that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting kind of discussing the lifelong chronicity or whatever nature of it. Talking about, I mean, but then there's all sorts of like social aspects that I, I'm sure you went through, like um, how you feel, how you look, how people treat you. I, I don't. I'm sure some of this, some people, even adults, probably don't even get enough of that type of information beforehand. But it's specific. It's different for adolescents. I mean, that's a whole stage. I mean, I think about like all the stuff I was self conscious about when I was younger, and things like that. So I can only imagine going through that. So that's really cool research.
Thank you. I'm excited to get started. We're going to start recruitment soon, so I'm excited to talk to people, and it's a lot of qualitative interviews. So I'm always thankful when they share their stories because I know that it's super sensitive topic, but I think
Yeah.
that it'll be an important project.
And you're the right person to do it. You can empathize and you talk about all those different things and have the right questions. That's really cool. So, okay, what made you look into more like medical therapy then?
Yeah, it's funny because a couple of months before I actually started being interested in medications, I gave a keynote at the Obesity Medicine Association's conference, and I said, right now my goal is not weight loss. And I think that's just true of the patient experience of it is kind of an exhausting experience, managing obesity, and sometimes you need to take a step back. And I was planning a wedding, and I was working on my qualifying exams, and so it was a lot of things going on at once. But after my wedding and things kind of calmed down, I stepped on a scale again and realized the level of regain that I had encountered. And it took a lot of conversating with myself, because I do still have a lot of internalized stigma. And the 16-year-old me was like, wait, we had bariatric surgery. We're done. That's like the one thing, once you get that, you're good. And then the science side of me was like, that's not true. And that's not how any of this works. But it took a lot of convincing myself that it's okay. And especially seeing all of the chatter about these new medications, I was curious. So I actually started on topiramate alone, and that worked to get some weight off for a little bit. And then they tried to add the phentermine, and that didn't work super well
Hmm.
for me. And that's when I decided to go with the Manjaro, because I think I had kind of reached a place where the topiramate had done its job, but I needed a little bit something more.
Yeah, a little boost. What dose of topiramate did you use?
I don't remember, because it was kind of like every
25,
2 weeks I
50.
wanted to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I took like
Okay.
50 in the morning and 50 in the evening, so it was
Yeah,
a
that's
higher dose.
reasonable. Any side effects from the topiramate?
I was really sleepy when I first started taking it, but after that, everything kind of normalized, and I was good. I didn't really experience a whole lot of anything on it.
Very cool. So what was it like taking the Manjaro then?
That one was a very different experience, because in addition to, the topiramate kind of quieted my appetite a little bit, but I still had that food noise in a way that after I started taking the Manjaro, I didn't realize how much mental capacity I was spending a day thinking about what I was eating until those thoughts were gone. So I feel like I'm a lot more productive at work, and I'm a lot more present in my conversations with my loved ones and in my time with loved ones, because I'm not having those constant thoughts. So that was it was a life changing experience to realize that, I'm talking to my husband, I'm like, is this how you walk around the world, not having these constant thoughts? It was something that I just couldn't conceptualize before.
That's so interesting. Everybody says, I mean, we've had, I don't know, maybe almost a dozen people kind of similar experiences on the podcast, and they say pretty much the same thing. Quite remarkable. Any side effects from the medicine?
I get a little tired after my injection day, but other than that, not
Nausea?
really. No.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what dose are you on now, if you don't mind me
I'm
asking?
on 5, but my sequence physician just spun me up to 7.5, so that'll be my
Okay.
next box.
Very cool. And do you have any specific goals, or is it like just see where you get, or what's your plan?
I am still working through that. I've never maintained. So my goal is just to get to a place and then figure out maintenance, because that is something that I have never mastered. It feels like I'm either on or I'm off. And so I'm excited to, I feel like doing it with medications, and I felt this way after bariatric surgery too, but um, being on a medication and having that constant help in a biological way makes maintenance feel sustainable. Whereas the bariatric surgery, the year after, so a couple years after, it was more feasible to kind of live a maintenance lifestyle. And then the farther we got out from surgery, the more difficult that maintenance seemed to become. So I'm just excited to figure out maintenance once we get to a place where I feel comfortable.
I think you will. How's the feel? Like, let's say you're within the like 8 months after surgery. Do you remember how that felt versus when you started taking the GLP-1?
It was a similar kind of feeling of satiety. And I think the difference between being on a medication and having the surgery is that I still kind of had that appetite, and you get to a place where you can kind of graze, which you can't do that right after surgery, but you get to a place
Mm-hmm.
where I can have something now and then an hour or so later. And then you get to a place where it's a little bit easier to do that. Whereas the satiety that you have on a medication is a different level satiety, where you're full for hours and you're not thinking about your next meal until it's about an appropriate time. Whereas before, it's like I would have breakfast and then a morning snack and then, those types of things. And that is required after surgery, just because of the smaller amount that you're able to eat. But it's a very interesting comparison to think about right after bariatric surgery compared to being on a medication, because they're similar, but they're different in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people describe it as. Like, there's more fullness, but the satiety, the brain communication, which is a different feeling. Both are
Yeah.
important, obviously. Like, so you could eat a huge salad with nothing on it and still not be satiated, um, but feel full because your belly's distended and you're like, I have a lot of food in there, but my mind is telling me I need more food. But you're having reflux and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But there is a. Did you have the bypass or the sleeve?
The bypass.
bypass. So the bypass has a slightly, should have at least hypothetically, a slightly more um, biochemical uh, satiety effect. So you probably did feel that, but it's interesting. People say kind of similar things. Very cool. What are you lifting weights? What are you doing? Are you doing any physical activity?
Yeah, so I actually fell in love with strength training after my bariatric surgery. I have like pictures of me and my brother and my mom going to the gym and lifting weights and those types of things. I do love cardio. I love any kind of workout that makes me feel like I'm about to die. Not really sure why, but I love high intensity types of things. And I'm getting to a place now where I'm trying to balance my level of cardio with my strength training because I know that that's super important. And that's one thing I love about Sequence is I have to have a prescribed gym plan to go in and lift weights because I don't feel super confident going in and being able to put together a comprehensive workout. I feel pretty confident on a treadmill or on an elliptical or a piece of cardio equipment, but then when I get to the weight floor, I get kind of confused. So I've done Orange Theory for a long time. I love that, but they don't have enough of a strength training
Hmm.
component for me. So I'm looking to supplement those with more weightlifting type of activities.
Very cool. I love hearing that. Of course.
Yeah.
Um, And then, like, what about how's your nutrition changed? Like, with the like, let's say your dietary pattern has that changed at all, or is it still similar types of food, just less of it? And how are you doing with that?
I would say it's similar types of foods, it's just different portions. And then there are things sometimes that um, before I could not have in the house. So there were certain foods that I couldn't have because I knew that I couldn't have a reasonable portion of those and they would be gone or 2 or 3 days. And so that's something interesting being on a medication that I feel like has helped my relationship with food is I can have those foods in the house and have them when I want them. And then sometimes I forget that they're even there. Whereas prior to medication, I was like, I know that's there. How can I fit it into my plan for the day? How can I meet my goals? And so incorporate this. Whereas now it comes really naturally to kind of build a meal and include foods that I still love, but it's not a constant kind of obsession with those.
Yeah, that's such a misconception. You know, I mean, you're on Twitter. It's I think right.
Yeah.
You're on Twitter. These people are just ridiculous. They'll post like donuts with the Ozempic shot, and they'll say like, look, you know, people are using these shots just so they can eat donuts. It's like, no, that's not how it works. The the medicine helps you do what you already need to, like you already know how to do, and then it kind of reduces the wanting of those, but you still like them if you want to have it. And then it actually people people are like it's going to ruin relationships with food. It actually improves the relationship with food because now you can take it or leave it. You still like it, but like it doesn't have control over you, type of thing. Um,
That's what I think I made a tweet about a very similar saying that I kind of understood now why people thought obesity was a willpower issue. Because if everyone else is walking around with this feeling of satiety, of course it seems to you that people are going above and beyond to overindulge in things if you've never experienced not feeling satiated, which is what I
mm-hmm.
felt like I was experiencing before. So lots of misconceptions on the Twitter.
Yeah, and we're probably speaking to the choir. Anybody listening to this is probably like, "Yeah, that's me." And you know, hopefully, there are people that aren't like that aren't necessarily a patient yet, or maybe they're just trying to learn, maybe to help with this stigma and just complete misconception of here you are, a very hardworking academic researcher, and like having physiological biological drivers, and it's like you know it academically. We have dietitians too that say the same thing. They're very smart hardworking people, and it's like having an itch that you just that's getting worse and worse and worse that you're saying don't scratch it, type of thing. People don't get it, but I think these stories from people like you are very important for people to hear, that it's not just like a discipline willpower thing. Very cool. Anything else that you want the listeners to know, like about your experience? You have a unique perspective on things.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of a biased opinion, but I do think education is power. I make a joke that you don't actually have to go get a PhD in obesity research. That's just something that I willingly thought was fun. But I think the more that you know, the easier it is to kind of chip at that internalized stigma. Because it's something that I still struggle with. From the time I wake up to the time I go to sleep at night, I'm in conversations like this, talking about the science behind obesity, talking about all of those things. And I still, have those days where I'm really hard on myself or I have those doubts. And so I always tell people that it's good to not only have this information for your benefit, it can help you, but also when you see those things online or if you're conversating with someone, you can kind of plant seeds in those conversations and you might not change somebody's mind. But if you're in a room full of people and they're having conversations about these medications or other interventions for obesity and people are saying stigmatizing things and you plant a seed, you don't know who else in that room is struggling and maybe feeling similar to you. But it's always important, I feel like, to have those conversations, not necessarily to change anyone's mind, but so that other people don't feel alone. And that's why I share on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook my journey, because even though I get a lot of mean comments,
Oh
I know that
gosh.
there are people out there who are reading it who identify with what I'm saying.
Well, we appreciate your comments too. It's helpful to get. I think it's going to take a village or whatever you want to say to keep the conversation going, and it is helpful for many people. Even though, if yeah, the mean comments can be pretty. Um, it can ruin your day. I can imagine, but you are helping people, so it is appreciated. I can guarantee that.
Thank you. I will keep tweeting or threading. Is
Or
threading the new thing
threading.
now?
Threading's a new
Yeah.
thing starting yesterday. So, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I'm sure we'll have you on again once you publish your research and go over some of this educational info for adolescents going through bariatric surgery.
Thank you for having me.